Okay, we will reconvene public meeting number 41. And before we get to our last question, Commissioner Stebbins had something he wanted to raise about our topics yesterday.
Yeah, as we were discussing question 4 yesterday, which talked about any information in addition to that specified under section 9, what should the commission require phase 2 applicants to provide? Our consultants raised, I think it was Fred, conveniently enough, he just came in the room. Yeah, huh?
I think it was Guy. No
Or was it
disrespect to
Guy?
Fred.
No
Either way.
disrespect to you.
Either one.
Talking about asking a applicant to submit their business plan. And I was curious about that because it may help us collect information that may already be required. It also may give us some guidance, again, looking at revenue projection, anything else.
Well, I
but-
think, yeah, the revenue projections are critical. I mean, one of the fundamentals is the benefit that will be derived from the implementation of these casinos and having, and they have to do that. The publicly traded companies are already putting that in their SEC statements and
Okay.
making those projections. But having the financial projections for these properties is a critical benchmark
Okay.
going forward. And someone else mentioned before how, and it's not a negative, but the casinos are gonna present themselves in the best possible light. They wanna enter into these host agreements, they wanna get through these elections, and looking at what the reality is based on the facts and circumstances later on.
Now, in my standard definition of a business plan, oftentimes there are business strategies or information that could well be defined as confidential.
Yeah, the strategies and the marketing are something
Yeah.
that might be
So-
a little different. I mean, you're certainly entitled to question a casino if they say, we're gonna do $700 a day per table.
Right.
And every other casino in the area does $300 a day per table. Well, how did you get that? What are your assumptions? What's that based upon?
So you raised a good question about, additional information we can ask for, and maybe we have a guy to, thank for this, but, again, going back to section 9 and additional information we should ask for, you raised the idea of the business plan, which I don't think occurred to Enrique and I at the time that we were answering that question. I think there's helpful information in there. I want to be mindful of information they want to protect, but it also may give us some good insight into
Players.
their idea, their goals for the operations of that particular facility. So, but again, I don't want to ask for information that is theirs to protect or theirs to not kind of compromise
The commission should be able
themselves.
to see information that's proprietary. It would just be, there's a procedure in the regulations to request confidentiality, and if the request is valid, it could be granted.
Now, a typical business plan could, a simple submission of a business plan essentially allow an applicant to kind of double up on information that we may request elsewhere.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
There
thinking
are
of
very few
simplifying.
restrictions on what you can ask for as a commission. You have, an IEB is essentially a kind of a digging tool
Right.
that can go places that are inaccessible to a lot of other agencies. See, this is not a situation where you are forcing someone to be investigated. They have all volunteered
Right.
to be investigated. The application form consents to all of this, to provide whatever information is requested. So.
But this is
you
RFA,
should
you're
use
talking about
those
RFA
tools.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in terms of the, our efforts to hopefully speed up the process, would this simple request of submit your business plan for your XYZ proposed operation, would that necessarily help expedite the process, help expedite the information that we need to base a determination?
Absolutely.
It's in one place. I mean, they have a lot
Yeah.
of the same information in one
Yeah, I'm
place.
sure they could
Hiring,
cut and
what their
paste from other
projected
places.
hiring.
They've done economic evaluations.
Yeah.
I mean, they have projections and.
This would be part of the RFA 2 application.
Right, the
Yeah.
RFA too.
Now, remember, they have to do this for their, when they go to Wall Street, when
get
they
the money.
go to
Okay.
get the money, all you need are copies of what they it's essentially what they gave them. And we always ask for that during the investigation, but this will take place after the investigation, suitability are completed, so you will need updated ones more current to the time you're evaluating
The
this.
financial viability of the project will have been passed upon from the investment side already, and we'll have access to all those materials that you can review.
So putting forward the simple request of additional information, ask, say, your business plan for X, for your operation at this location.
Right.
It's gonna help them facilitate information to us that we're gonna require, hopefully will facilitate the application process a little bit faster.
I would also add that in any competitive bidding process, certainly that we're aware of, that standard procedure, you're not going to find too many objections, because that's going to be what's required to support their projections.
Okay. So then, Mr. Chairman, if I might offer a motion to go back to question 4, I move that the commission, in the Phase 2 application process, request a business plan from the applicant for
Yes.
the operation at this site.
Absolutely. It could either be in the Phase 2 regulations or just this independent request, either way.
And perhaps any other relevant documentation which will help you assess there.
But isn't, you're talking about section 9, isn't section 9 the one that sort of lays out the baseline?
Right.
It's not evaluation criteria.
Right, it's the
really-
baseline application
Application
material.
requirement.
Right.
And the question yesterday, is there anything in addition to what's already asked for in section 9, should we additionally request? And my motion is to ask an applicant to provide a copy of their business plan for that operation.
Okay. Second. Any further discussion?
No, I think, I'm fine with the motion, but I've forgotten what we did yesterday. Did we yesterday, in voting on question 4, list the things we were going to request? And so is this in addition to a list, or what is
We
this?
did not technically. We concluded that this was a question that could, depending on the day, on the discussion of this week especially, we could come back to, just for that very reason.
Okay. Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Okay, I didn't offload this one. Somebody else wants to offload this one. Question 31.
Mr. Grossman worked on this matter with me. I'm going to let him go through some of the recommendations here, but in general, when we took a look at this question, we took a look at it within the context of what are the currently existing provisions of the ethics law, and then are there specific provisions included in the gaming law that are applicable. In general, the question number 31 is, will the commission promulgate additional ethics or reporting standards for applicants and/or related municipalities? And I'm going to let Mr. Grossman go through some of the analysis.
So I think that the first thing is, the good news is this would clearly have to be done by regulation as opposed to policy. So we set that issue aside. And then the question becomes, would the commission be able to craft a meaningful and readily enforceable set of regulations as they apply to the groups of people that we're talking about? And there's really two separate groups of people. On the one hand, you're talking about applicants and licensees, or applicants who will later become licensees, and on the other, you're talking about municipal employees and municipal officials. And the commission, I believe, has recognized on a number of occasions that the legislature was very careful and deliberate in promulgating and enacting this comprehensive legislative scheme. So we have to look to what they did and what they didn't do. And one of the things that I think is noteworthy that they didn't do is to mandate the commission to enact or promulgate regulations relative to ethics for applicants, for licensees, and for municipal officials and employees. where they did in Section 3K of Chapter 23K mandate the commission to adopt those types of ethics rules for its own employees and for itself. So that's the baseline with which we took to reviewing this issue. In order to figure out whether such rules were necessary, we thought it first important to figure out what the existing rules were. And we articulated them here in the memo. These were the primary ones, which is not to say there aren't others that may apply to these individuals, but when stepping back to think about all the situations we would be attempting to prevent or prohibit, it seems, at least at this juncture, that all of those would be covered by the existing rules, which is not to say that as we step back and attempt to draft regulations moving forward, as we comb through the regulations from other states and review best practices, that there won't be other principles that we'll want to incorporate within the regulations. But as we sit here today, I think it would be difficult to draft a set of regulations that apply to just these groups. And there are just a few that I point out. The first, as they apply to applicants, and I think applicants are clearly separate from licensees. Licensees will clearly face a very robust set of regulations in the future once they become a licensee. So we included them here just to add some texture to the presentation, but really we're focused on the applicants. And you'll see through review of 23K that there are a number of provisions that impose ethical obligations upon applicants. The first deal with the continuing duty of applicants to cooperate with the commission. There is an obligation upon applicants to provide full and truthful information to the commission. There are prohibitions against certain political contributions, certain disclosures that are required relative to political contributions. And then, of course, there are the standard ethics laws, if you will, Chapter 268A, that prohibit all things related to what we would consider to be bribery and things of that sort. So I think when you step back and try to envision any scenario that we would consider to be unsavory when it comes to the dealings of applicants, most, if not all, of those things are already covered, I would suggest. And I think the same can be said of municipal employees and municipal officials at this point, who are subject to the existing ethics laws, of course, under 268A, 268B, and the Ethics Commission regulations. And I think when you go through those, and we've set them out here so you can look at as well, that most, with one exception, which I'll mention in a second, pretty much, once again, any potentially unsavory acts that a municipal employee or official would be engaged in are addressed in the ethics laws. In fact, the legislature, of course, supplemented 268A with section, 5A, dealing with the so-called cooling off period for municipal officials in their dealings with gaming licensees and the like. The only hole, if you will, in this whole thing that I was able to detect as we looked through this was the issue pertaining to the wagering at gaming establishments by municipal officials. And I know that's an issue that you'll have before you, so that might be better left there. But that would be certainly something that you would consider including in any so-called code of ethics that applies to municipal officials. But aside from that, I think 268A is very robust and would be able to cover just about any scenario that would concern you at this point. And just by way of contrast and conclusion, I would say that, for example, in the draft ethics code that you'll consider that we proposed for the commissioners and our own employees, we have enhanced the unwarranted privileges provision that exists in the ethics code, which limits unwarranted privileges to substantial benefit, which would be $50 or more. In the commission code that we're proposing, we remove that. So any commissioner or employee would be prohibited from receiving any unwarranted privilege regardless of value. So there are certain areas, if you're inclined to do so, that we could enhance, but at this juncture, it may be premature.
Questions, thoughts?
Well, that's a good succinct analysis, I think, of comprehensive and very helpful.
The one thing that occurred to me, and it was actually suggested to me by somebody, because of the referendum process we have, there is an invitation to win favor in the community, and A, is this covered already by something else, and B, if it isn't, is it worth thinking about? It might be an interesting kind of protection for the process and for the developers to require them to disclose to us anything that is asked for. If somebody solicits a contribution to their organization, if somebody asks for a job for a friend, anything. So it puts them in the position of saying, if somebody comes to them for a contribution to their nonprofit, puts them in the position of saying yes or no, but you should know that I have to disclose that this request was made. So, A, is that covered? And B, do you think it adds anything material to the protections to the process that are already in the law?
Let me just jump in here again, because this ties into something that occurred before Todd arrived, and that is our existing regulations require disclosure of all things that were given to a municipality or a municipal official, even permissibly. And there is a look-back provision to November 21, 2011, when the legislation was passed. So anything that was actually given by way of donations to community funds, new playgrounds, and the like, is there. There is no request at the no regulation at the moment saying that you have to disclose anything that was requested. So that would be new, but that's a context in which it occurred. This would have to be done by regulation, I think, since we're, as Todd said, we're regulating outside folks. So, but that's the context in which we work.
Well, I think we always have to consider the relative enforceability of any regulation we put into effect. So the question would be how we would, how well we could put an enforcement plan together to ensure that we cover all of that. But certainly asking for that type of information sounds reasonable. Whether it's already covered, I'd have to go back and look at.
Well, one thing I'll mention in regard to municipal officials, if we're talking about municipal officials, 268A, Section 17A, states that no municipal employee shall directly or indirectly receive or request compensation from anyone other than the city or town or municipal agency related to any particular matter in which the same city or town is a party or has a direct or substantial interest. In addition, there's unwarranted privileges section. Maybe Todd can help me find that.
23B2.
23B2 that prohibits municipals from obtaining any unwarranted privileges based on their position. So in a situation such as a municipal official asks a casino operator to hire a relative based on something that is before them, that would clearly fall within the authority of the Ethics Commission to make a determination on whether or not that violates the ethics laws.
And then there's 23B3 as well, which talks about doing something that would cause a reasonable person to conclude that that person can improperly influence an official. and unduly enjoy their favor based upon something they've done. That's the so-called, I think, appearance of impropriety clause, which may cover something like that. I think the ethics laws are fairly robust. We could certainly plug some holes if that is necessary.
Well, that's the question I'm asking.
Yeah,
You know,
and it's hard to.
Is it, I mean, you know, I can imagine that folks who are trying to get ready for, you know, everybody's gonna go to the folks and come into town and say, hey, don't you wanna contribute to my Little League or my whatever? And some of that is fine. Sometimes maybe a motivation might not be fine, but it's a way to provide some cover. It's a way to bring disclosure to a process which I think is a little innovative, you know, and it's, I don't think it is, I mean, there are certain things that are covered. You can't ask for a bribe, but it just, you know, it seems to me it might be interesting. I may be a mountain out of a molehill, I don't know.
I'd like to agree with the distinction that Commissioner McHugh makes, which is asking and giving, an important one, and we're covered with the giving,
Right.
and it's only a disclosure. It doesn't even preclude it.
No, it doesn't
And,
include at all. It's a protection for the applicant.
It is,
Which is
it
a
is.
protection for the process.
Right,
So
right,
you can't sidle up to the applicant and say, hey, my club would sure like a few bucks. You know,
right.
without
But-
knowing that it's gonna be disclosed.
But if we try to, this goes back to the enforceability, if we try to have the applicant document how many times they're asked unsuccessfully, it may be a bit too onerous, really, just in terms of documentation. They could easily reject on the basis of, if I gave you, I would have to disclose it to the commission. But
Have we seen that anywhere else? Some kind of language like that? We have to
Well,
disclose?
There are, disclosure, there are more severe restrictions, for example, gambling restrictions in New Jersey, for example, that are prohibited. Local officials, state officials aren't allowed, that have jurisdiction over the Atlantic County. So they're even more severe than just disclosure of potential, you know, approaches. There are no, I don't know that there's specific requirements that the local officials, under the casino law, there's no requirement that the local officials report anybody at the casino that approached them or that they were approached by. But it would be.
Might have been a good thing the way
Yeah,
things
it
went
would
down.
probably
Might have
be
been
a
a good
long
thing.
list. Yeah. Yeah.
But there are restrictions on a thing of value. So you're gonna give a thing of value.
But
In
not like a
context.
park to the city to get into.
One of the things we had pointed out for the first read of the statute months ago, when we had submitted some general comment to the commission, was the absence of the local official prohibition on gambling, and suggested that be included. And I think it's in, I'm pretty sure it's in the strategic plan, the recommended
Yes.
legislative amendment. You know, that is something that we have observed around the country, that different governments have put into effect. And I noticed in the statutes that were cited in today's, I think, very good summary of the different applicable ethical areas, there is discussion in there about prohibition of offers and so forth, of let's say favoritism or whatever. Very difficult to police. And if someone is an official and going to a, let's say, a licensee as opposed to an applicant, going to a gambling location and is extended credit, okay, maybe more than, let's say, the parameters would normally establish for the place, and that person gets themselves deeply in debt to the facility. If those type of situations occur, you have temptations that you want to avoid. Prohibition avoids the difficulty in trying to police the type of protections that otherwise exist in the ethical laws. And sometimes that absolute prohibition is better for both parties. It prevents suspicion and it prevents temptation. And that was why we came down on the side of recommending that type of prohibition be put in effect. But it's in and of itself, it's sometimes difficult to police also, but obviously if you know a particular official, a particularly elected official is there, that person is involved actively in the supervision of the government, of the host community, and they're at the tables every night, it also creates a public perception
Yeah.
issue.
Well, and we're gonna,
that's-
we're gonna deal with this one. This is, as you know, is a separate question that
Yes.
we are gonna get to. But at the moment, the suggestion, the recommendation is that we not add anything else to the panoply of laws that are already in place. I'm raising the possibility of one exception. I'm not hearing anybody else rise to the idea particularly.
No, I think it's interesting to explore, and I just don't know if anyone else has that. If you've been, this is again from the operator's side.
Have you been
The
solicited?
application,
Right.
the applicant, have you been solicited, and does that,
Well,
It's
a
a question
regulatory
that comes up in
requirement.
investigations, I'm sorry. It's a question that comes up during the
Yes.
course of investigations
Yes.
on a routine basis, but I don't remember it ever being actually provided for. And
Does it
It
strike
would also
you?
be a criminal,
Oh, yeah.
in the criminal law, if anybody is approached for solicitation on a bribe, they're required to report it.
If it's in
This
return
may
for
not
an
be
action, but if it's, a boys' club
Right.
that goes to an applicant and says, hey, can you contribute? It'd make you look better in the community.
Right.
That's private conduct that I don't know if we need to get into the regulation business.
But it's readily abused, and there's gonna be a gray area. It's always gonna be,
Right.
when you have a business, you oftentimes get phone calls from people
Right.
raising money for various things, and you think, well, if I don't give, maybe they're not gonna come when my alarm goes off, So there's an implicit, but I don't hear that it strikes anybody. I think it's a very interesting technique. I think it does some interesting things, but I don't hear anybody else thinking that it's a good enough idea to amend the recommendation from the floor, so.
Well, I mean, it's consistent with the recommendation that there may be some exceptions that should be reviewed within the context of existing law. So it's directly in keeping with the recommendation.
Yeah.
That there's, but.
But you were saying, at the moment,
No
nothing to put on the table.
broad-based
Yeah.
approach to new regulations, but we should evaluate exceptions where they come up and where we should take a look at.
Right, but I'm hearing the evaluation at this point is not worth pursuing further, which is, seems like, okay. So it sounds like, so the recommendation is that why don't you, somebody say it specifically, so we can so move. What is the recommendation? So your bottom line
sorry.
recommendation is,
I guess the recommendation would be not, at the present time, to draft for promulgation a specific set of
Additional ethics or reports.
requirements for applicants, licensees, municipal employees, or municipal officials.
right, ethics or reporting standards, right.
So moved.
Second? Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? You guys have it.
good work,
Thank you.
good work.
Before we adjourn, I just have an information, I mean, this is I don't know if it interests anybody, but as long as we have the consultants here. Commissioner Zuniga and I were on the online gaming task force that Treasurer Grossman put together. And the recommendations that are gonna come out of that, I heard on the radio already, so it's not a secret, basically the task force is gonna recommend that the lottery under Treasurer Grossman essentially get some right to begin to explore pilot programs in various kinds of online gaming, and also to pursue a study in effect with the Gaming Commission and the casino operators about what relationships there should be and so forth. So we were fine with it, we agreed with it, with the task force report. But the Spectrum report, which will be appended to it, had as its almost its strongest recommendation that all online gaming should be done by and
The lottery.
supervised by the lottery. And Commissioner Zuniga and I said, A, that's never been discussed, but B, we don't know enough to know whether that's a good idea or not. We just don't know whether certainly probably lottery products ought to be done by the lottery, but whether casino games should be done by the lottery or whether poker should be done by the lottery, we don't know. And so we just left we just said we're not endorsing the Spectrum report, we're endorsing the task force report. But my question to you all was, it just as an early window on this, what we're going to have to at some point go to our licensees, and as this legislation unfolds, and recommend whether we agree with that or not. And so I'm just off the top of your heads, from what you see going around, what you think values are, what's your sense about that? Whether the Gaming Commission needs to. We're not interested in a turf fight. If it's somebody else's business and it makes sense to go there, fine, doesn't matter to us. But in terms of maximizing the gaming, servicing our interests and the casino's interests, do you have an opinion on that?
Let Spectrum talk to that first.
Yeah, I mean, well, Michael can talk because he did the report for the lottery, but basically there's a broader backdrop here, the issue of federal legislation, which may or may not happen. No one really knows. We think it's unlikely this session, but that would preempt a lot of what's happening around the country with states moving into internet gaming based on that decision that the Justice Department issued that letter last year. We see a lot of lotteries, we see all the lotteries considering this as because it's the easiest and the most facilitates moving on to poker and perhaps internet gaming down the road. So these are issues that a lot of states are now grappling with. Nevada passed, the Nevada Gaming Control Board passed regulations, but their problem is they don't have a big population base. So they would have to enter into consortiums with other states. So these are issues, and it's certainly legitimate for the commission as well as the lottery to think about these things and see if there's a unified policy.
Yeah, I'll just try to answer it succinctly. We were tasked with a couple of assignments with respect to the lottery, and one of which was to explore whether or not the lottery should even enter this realm. And it's a question that a lot of lotteries across the country, whether they're in casino states or not, are grappling with the most, or saying that we sort of have to move into that realm. But we were also tasked with, if the lottery is going to do that, how does it do so effectively? And one of the tasks was also to ensure that whatever recommendations we were able to come up with protected the interests of the 7,400 lottery retailers in the Commonwealth, as well as the value of the future casino licenses. So essentially what we said as to how with all that in mind, and assuming that you want an effective regulatory structure and you don't want competing entities going head-to-head unnecessarily in the online space, one of the things we thought as an initial starting point would be that if the lottery is going to pursue some form of online gaming, that it do so with the full cooperation of the future casino industry when it comes online, with the understanding that generating revenues online is one goal, but it's only one goal. An additional goal would be, how do you then use online and the online presence to generate physical visits to casinos, which is where the jobs are, where it has its own revenue stream and helps justify that capital investment. So we suggested in the recommendation for consideration that as the lottery moves toward that, if the lottery is going to move there, the lottery should do it, but with the developing cross-marketing campaigns with the future licensees that would help them, the casino licensees, to use this online opportunity provided by the lottery as a way to market to additional customers, to get them to visit casinos. Additionally, we recognize that in any sort of recommendation like this, things are moving very quickly, and no regulation is set in stone forever. That circumstances change, technology changes, demographics change, the economics change, and it may be at some future point that that's not a viable alternative, or that not the most viable option. but at least initially, this was what we felt would be the most effective way for the lottery to pursue online.
But we're talking online gaming now, not, it's separate than lottery. I don't see your recommendation. We're the Independent Gaming Commission, and I don't see where you'd make the recommendation that all gaming should go to the lottery. I just don't see that, personally. And I've learned a lot about this in the last couple of, lots of gaming commissions are now, New Jersey's very actively underway, writing regulations for this, and it's the gaming side of the house, nothing to do with the lottery in New Jersey. So I don't see your recommendation as being viable now that we are an independent gaming commission up and running. I just don't see where the lottery would be the appropriate avenue for all online gaming.
And you have identified one of the challenges facing any state is that one of, unanticipated to be sure, but one of the challenges facing all states as online gaming moves closer to reality is that the line between lotteries and casinos is going to blur. There's no question about it. And states such as, including New Jersey, they're not necessarily speaking to each other in terms of developing a coordinated policy. But that was essentially the genesis of that, as trying to find a means or suggesting one alternative as a means of protecting the value of the casino licenses while still allowing the lottery to pursue online gaming.
I was just gonna say, we weren't part of that Spectrum's recommendation on that job, but I do understand the point that Mike's making. I would also point out, though, that online gaming is not really another form of gaming. Online gaming is just another method by which people play games. It's not a whole other type of gaming. So, to the extent that an agency is established that has jurisdiction over games played in a certain place, these will be games played in that place. And it would seem, at this stage, and I can understand if lottery does it first before the casinos are up and going, obviously lottery has to monitor that and regulate that. But when casinos are operating and if they offer online gaming, if they're allowed to, it would seem to be, it would make things a little inconvenient for them to have to answer to two different agencies in order to play the same types of games. And to have two different licenses from the lottery committee, the employees, a lot of the employees will be on the floor offering games that are online and so on. They have to get licenses from both agencies. So it raises a lot of questions. I understand Spectrum's recommendation because at these initial stages, there really are no casinos to have these games. The lottery might be able to get up and running very quickly.
That wasn't the point, though. But in the recommend, but that was sort of the way I felt. We said we don't know a thing about this. We don't know what the casinos want to do. We don't have casinos yet, and this nothing's going to happen for a long time. So this is not an urgent issue. But I raised the same issue with me. It seemed to me as a practical, the legislature made the decision that they wanted to have two regulatory bodies. Maryland made a different decision, and whether it was good or bad is beside the point. This is the decision they've made. So why you would recommend that casinos have to be regulated by two different agencies seemed odd to me too.
We didn't anticipate, and we certainly didn't anticipate that lottery commission.
If all online gambling were being regulated by the lottery, then they would be operating. Necessarily, that was what the implication was. So anyway, that's enough. I mean, I just was interested in hearing a little bit more from you, but also hearing your instinct on that.
May I say one thing about submissions? I know there are a lot of folks that are working with applicants here, and just speaking this is from the Investigations and Enforcement Bureau, we're looking at applications, we're looking to get this process done in a way that's timely for everybody, and I would just ask that if we could really concentrate on complete all the information that's requested, if we could pay a lot of attention to submitting to us those applications with all of that requested information from all of the entities. That would be very helpful to us in turning it around, starting the investigation. We really can't start that investigation unless we have all the information requested. So if you just can get that word out, that would be very helpful. Thanks.
We're trying to get everybody to speed up. Can you at least please listen to us? All right.
Motion to adjourn.
You mentioned that we would do things on Friday. The consultancy, things that we canceled on Friday.
No, we did, we have a Friday session available, on, yeah, it's on. I don't know that we absolutely have to have, 4 or 5 of you there, but the meeting is on it's scheduled, at the moment, it's scheduled from 1 to 5, the same as the rest of the week. We may shorten it a little bit, but it is on, yeah. So a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Thank you.